Another American citizen has been shot and killed by immigration officers in Minneapolis as protests against immigration enforcement intensify across the nation. 37-year-old Alex Pretti was an ICU nurse who treated veterans. Meanwhile, in Washington, Democrats are threatening to pull out of the funding deal reached last week because of the money being provided for immigration enforcement. If they do so, that would trigger another government shutdown. Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Here to help us understand this inflection point and how the country is responding to immigration enforcement is USA Today breaking news reporter Christopher Cann. Christopher, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the news out of Minneapolis over the weekend, the killing of Alex Pretti. What happened there?
So on Saturday morning, Alex Pretti, as you mentioned, an ICU nurse who worked at a VA hospital in Minneapolis, he was shot and killed by Border Patrol agents. He was one of several people who were filming agents at the time while they were conducting enforcement operations. That's become a very common practice in Minneapolis in recent weeks. The videos quickly were shared online about the shooting and show Pretti holding up his phone and recording agents. At one point, one of them pushes a woman who was standing near Pretti to the ground. Pretti could be seen then trying to help her and lead her away. When he's pepper sprayed and taken to the ground, he's surrounded by Border Patrol agents, and then one of them eventually opens fire, killing him. Now, local and federal officials both say that Pretti had a gun on him while he was filming federal agents that morning. Brian O'Hara, the police chief in Minneapolis, said he has a concealed carry permit. No videos show him pulling out a gun before he was tackled to the ground, and it appears his gun was removed before officers began firing. Now, Pretty's death, of course, comes less than 3 weeks after an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Good in her car, and it reignited protests in Minneapolis, as well as renewed calls for immigration agents to leave the city and the Trump administration to end the deployment there.
Border Patrol leadership presented a very different narrative of events. What were they saying, and have they made any attempt to reconcile their version with what we've all seen with our own eyes?
Border Patrol leadership, as well as top Trump administration officials to Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and others, quickly labeled Pretti a domestic terrorist. They said that he had brought a gun to the protests to kill and even massacre law enforcement. Now, videos, of course, contradict these statements. And again, there's no evidence that he took out his gun or ever reached for it before it was taken away. Pretti also has no criminal history. Over the last 24 hours, federal officials have continued to defend the agents involved, but have also said that they've wanted an investigation before reaching conclusions, not being as declarative in their statements. Over the weekend, when pressed on the administration's earlier statements, Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, for example, they had seemed to suggest that just having a gun at a protest, even if it's concealed and you have a permit, is dangerous and an indication of possibly malintent. Now, these statements very quickly drew the ire and backlash of many Second Amendment groups, including the NRA.
Federal judge heard arguments contesting the legality of ongoing immigration enforcement in Minnesota yesterday. This hearing was the result of a suit filed against Homeland Security by Minneapolis and the Twin Cities earlier in the month, alleging that the surge of 3,000 more agents amounted to a, quote, federal invasion, end quote, and violated the state's sovereignty. What did Homeland Security argue, and when will the judge issue their ruling?
So the Department of Homeland Security said that in response to the state's lawsuit, said that it's a misreading of the Constitution and called the case an absurdity. In court yesterday, Kate Menendez, and a judge who's overseeing that case, she was appointed by President Biden. She appeared skeptical of the state's argument that the federal government was violating the Constitution. She had said at one point that, I don't know, talking to one of the lawyers for the state, saying, I don't know how you can ask me to identify when the federal government has crossed the line. So she's not yet issued an order, but one could come at any time.
Christopher, there's also a lot of tension regarding state and local investigations into both the Renee Good shooting and now Alex Pretti's as well. What's the status there?
In the immediate aftermath of Renee Good's killing, state and local officials immediately called for an independent investigation. the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is the state agency that handles these sorts of investigations of officer-involved shootings. They said that they were blocked by the FBI, and then Kristi Noem came out and said that federal investigators will lead the probe, and said that the state doesn't have jurisdiction. The DOJ has since come out and said that they're not investigating the shooting of Renee Good by ICE agent Jonathan Ross. And this is particularly notable because the DOJ, in Trump's first term, launched an investigation into the killing of George Floyd, which happened very close to where Renee Good was shot and killed. And in recent days, after the killing of Alex Pretti, the Minnesota Criminal Apprehension Bureau filed a lawsuit saying that federal officials were blocking them from access to the crime scene. A judge in that case granted the state's request and ordered that the Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies don't alter or destroy any evidence. And yesterday, Tim Walz came out and said that he had spoken with Trump on the phone, called it a productive phone call. And he said that Trump had agreed to speak with the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that state investigators can independently probe the deadly shooting of Alex Pretti.
There's been a groundswell of protesters on the streets and sub-zero temperatures to contest immigration enforcement activities. USA Today has national correspondent Trevor Hughes on the ground. What is he telling you?
Tens of thousands of protesters have taken to the streets in recent days to cry both the shootings of Alex Pretti and the shooting of Renee Good, and call for those 3,000 federal agents to leave the state. On Friday, there's just the day before Alex Pretti was shot, there was an economic boycott statewide, and that had children leaving school, people staying home from work, businesses closed across Minneapolis, and you had thousands again marching in the streets. And so then after this shooting, there's been another surge in protests in the Twin Cities. Tim Walz deployed at least 1,500 National Guard troops to assist. And so in the last 3 days or so, we've seen more marches, more demonstrations, and while most have been peaceful, there has been tear gas and pepper spray deployed to disperse these crowds. On Sunday night, there was a group of protesters that had gathered outside a hotel where federal agents believed to be sleeping. They held a rally there, but kind of banging pots and pans, and eventually skirmishes broke out. Protesters had smashed windows, tagged the building with graffiti, reading ICE out, but the scene was eventually cleared, and there was no arrests, according to state officials.
Have the two killings, first Renee Good and now Alex Pretti, made some people rethink their own safety?
Attendants of these protests and Minneapolis residents across the city say that they're afraid that more shootings will happen if federal agents don't leave their city. There's been widespread reports alleging people being stopped because of racial profiling. Those reports even came from police chiefs in the Minneapolis area who said that their off-duty officers had been targeted. There's been also reports of federal agents entering homes without judicial warrants, and instances of them detaining U.S. citizens for hours at a time. So all of these things combined, along with, of course, of those two deadly shootings, has really stirred fear among residents in the Twin Cities. But people are still coming out in droves, even amid freezing temperatures, sometimes below zero.
How is Congress responding, Christopher?
So Democrats have come out against ICE and Border Patrol and have vowed not to fund their parent agency, the Department of Homeland Security. And this is a big deal because both parties, in order to avoid a government shutdown, have to pass a funding measure that currently includes $64 billion for the Department of Homeland Security, and $10 million of that will go directly to ICE. So with Democrats digging in ahead of this January 30th deadline, it looks like a government shutdown is becoming more and more likely. Republicans, on the other hand, have increasingly begun raising concerns over this latest shooting. They've called for a full and transparent investigation. Some of the lawmakers include Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy, North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis, James Comer, and other members of Congress. Bill Cassidy, for example, said that he called the shooting in Minneapolis incredibly disturbing, and said that the credibility of ICE and the Department of Homeland Security is at stake. Comer actually came out and said that it might be better for agents to leave the city and let residents decide there. And he said that if things keep going the way they are, it quote, is only going to get worse.
And what has the Trump administration said?
For the last 2 weeks, the Trump administration has blamed Renee Good, Alex Pretti for the shootings, saying that they tried to carry out violence against federal agents. Trump and others also blamed Walz, Governor Tim Walz, and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, saying that they're not helping federal law enforcement agents and are making things worse. But since the weekend, there's been a pretty sizable shift in their tone. On Monday, Trump said he was sending his border czar, Tom Homan, to Minnesota, and also said he and Tim Walz spoke on the phone. He described them as being on a similar wavelength and that they had a good call. Walz, describing that call in some detail, said that Trump had agreed to allow the state to conduct its own investigation of Alex Pretti's death, and also that Trump agreed to consider reducing the number of federal agents in Minnesota. So the conversation between Tim Walz and President Trump, of course, marks a pretty big tonal shift, and it comes only a week after Tim Walz, Mayor Frey, and other state Democrats in Minnesota were served subpoenas as part of a DOJ investigation into whether they conspired to impede federal law enforcement authorities in the state.
What impact are videos posted on social media having?
The videos that were posted to social media have, allowed people to see for themselves what happened and challenge how officials are describing the incident. And that's a sentiment we're hearing with a lot of protesters who are out in the streets, that they feel that the federal government had, potentially lied about the shooting and, took issue with them using terms like domestic terrorists to describe those who were killed. And on the official side, you have people like Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, who, when she went out on NBC's Meet the Press and said, your eyes don't lie, basically saying that, the video kind of shows exactly what happened, and you don't have to take federal officials at their word when you have such a clear view of what occurred. And so this has really fueled outrage at the incident, and it also draws parallels to the killing of George Floyd, which again occurred only a short distance from these recent shootings involving federal agents. So in 2020, it was a video of George Floyd's death at the hands of a police officer that sparked those nationwide protests, just as videos are doing so in this case.
And finally, do we have any sense of when federal agents will leave Minneapolis?
That's hard to know. Border Patrol Commander-at-Large Greg Bovino on Sunday said the government's immigration mission continues unabated in Minneapolis. Tim Walz said that Trump would consider taking some federal agents out of Minnesota. And considering the tonal shift from the White House, the growing uneasiness from Republicans about ICE and Border Patrol's tactics, the threat of a government shutdown, as well as polling that shows that most Americans don't agree with the way that immigration enforcement is being handled, it could be a political liability to keep those 3,000 immigration agents inside Minnesota.
Christopher Cann is a breaking news reporter for USA Today. Chris, thank you so much for making the time to speak with me.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.